Han Seok-Jin, a cold-blooded Korean mafia boss feared for his ruthless efficiency, is walking through a torrential downpour after a brutal negotiation when he finds a young girl, Yuna, sobbing in a dark alleyway. Expecting to intimidate her away, he is instead frozen when she looks up and says a single sentence, "You smell like my dad's favorite coffee." This small observation shatters Seok-Jin's emotional armor, as Yuna's father was his only true friend, a man Seok-Jin unintentionally led to his death years ago. Seok-Jin takes the girl under his protection, discovering she is being hunted by his own rivals who want to use her as leverage. The story follows Seok-Jin as he transitions from a predator to a protector, eventually risking his entire criminal empire and his life to ensure Yuna finds the safety her father never had. The rain over Seoul wasn't falling, it was punishing. It turned the neon signs of the Gangnam district into bleeding smears of pink and blue. Han Seok-Jin stepped out of the black sedan, his silhouette cutting a jagged line against the storm. He was a man built of sharp edges, tailored wool, polished leather, and a heart hardened by 2 decades of underworld warfare. Behind him, 4 men in matching suits stood like stone gargoyles. They had just finished a negotiation that left Seok-Jin's knuckles bruised and his soul a little darker. He took a shortcut through a narrow alley, his boots splashing into oily puddles when he saw it. A splash of impossible, bright yellow. A small girl, no older than 8, sat huddled against a dumpster, clutching a gray stuffed rabbit. She wasn't screaming. She was shaking, a quiet, rhythmic sobbing that cut through the thunder more effectively than a gunshot. Seok-Jin stopped. His men reached for their waistbands, sensing a trap. But Seok-Jin raised a hand, silencing them. He stepped forward, the shadow of his long overcoat falling over the girl. Slowly, agonizingly, the most feared man in the capital lowered himself. He knelt. His expensive trousers soaked up the filth of the pavement. He looked into her wide, tear-rimmed eyes, expecting her to recoil from the scars on his neck. Instead, the girl reached out a trembling hand, touched the wet fabric of his lapel, and whispered, "You smell like my dad's favorite coffee. Are you bringing him home now?" The world tilted. The coffee, a specific, bitter blend from a shop that had burned down 5 years ago. The same shop where Seok-Jin's only friend, Min-ho, had worked before Seok-Jin's world had claimed his life. The silence in the alley was deafening. Seok-Jin didn't move for a full minute, the rain dripping off his nose and onto the girl's yellow hood. "Boss," one of his men, Do-yoon, ventured, stepping forward. "We need to move. The police will be patrolling this block in 5 minutes." Seok-Jin didn't look back. "Get the heater running in the car." "Hi. Boss, we can't." "Now," Seok-Jin commanded, his voice a low growl that vibrated in his chest. He reached out, his large, scarred hand looking monstrous against the girl's small shoulder. He didn't grab her, he offered a palm. "What's your name?" "Yuna," she hiccuped, hugging the rabbit tighter. "My mom said to wait here. But she went with the men in the black van. She told me to hide." Seok-Jin's blood turned to ice. He knew those vans. They belonged to the Choi syndicate, his direct rivals. If they had the mother, they were looking for the daughter. And if they were looking for the girl, it was because of what her father had left behind. Without a word, Seok-Jin scooped her up. She was feather-light, a fragile weight that felt heavier than any gold he'd ever carried. He shielded his head with his overcoat as he strode back to the car. Inside the Lexus, the heat cranked to a stifling 28 degrees Celsius. Yuna sat in the middle of the Italian leather seat, looking like a tiny bird in a gilded cage. Do-yoon watched through the rearview mirror, his expression frantic. "Seok-Jin Nim, if the council finds out we have Min-ho's brat, they'll think we're holding the ledger. This is a death sentence for all of us." Seok-Jin looked out the window at the blurred city lights. He felt the girl's damp hair against his arm. She had fallen asleep almost instantly, exhausted by terror. Then let them come, Seok-Jin whispered, his eyes reflecting the cold neon outside. I've spent 10 years being a ghost. It's time I started acting like a man. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and cold marble, perched so high above Seoul that the rain looked like static on a television screen. It was a place designed for a man who trusted no one, silent, sterile, and void of life. Until now. Seok-Jin stood in the center of the living room, his soaked overcoat discarded on the floor. He looked absurdly out of place, watching Yuna as she sat on his white velvet sofa, shivering despite the high heat. She looked tiny, a yellow speck in a gray world. Do-yoon, Seok-Jin said without looking back. Find dry clothes. And food. Something soft. Boss, I'm a high-ranking enforcer, not a nanny, Do-yoon muttered, though he was already reaching for his phone to call a 24-hour department store. Then learn, Seok-Jin snapped. As Do-yoon retreated, Yuna looked up. Her eyes wandered from the sleek, modern art on the walls to the visible holsters of the men standing guard at the door. She didn't look impressed, she looked sad. She reached into her yellow raincoat and pulled out her stuffed rabbit. One of its long, gray ears was suspended by a single, fraying thread. He's hurt, she whispered, her voice cracking. Seok-Jin walked over, his heavy footsteps muffled by the silk rug. He sat on the edge of the coffee table, eye level with her. He reached for the toy, his hands, calloused from years of gripping steering wheels and triggers, shaking slightly. I can fix it, he said. The lie felt heavy in his throat. He hadn't held a needle in 20 years. My dad used to fix him, Yuna said, watching him intently. He said even if things get broken, they can still be loved. That's what the coffee smell means. It means everything will be okay. Seok-Jin felt a phantom pain in his chest. He remembered Minho's small apartment, the smell of cheap espresso, and the way his friend had laughed about staying clean for his daughter. Seok-Jin had been the one who brought the violence to that apartment. He had been the one who had sent Minho on that final, fatal errand for the syndicate. He stood up and walked to a lacquered cabinet, pulling out a hidden emergency kit. He bypassed the morphine and the gauze, finding a small sewing kit meant for quick suit repairs. For the next 20 minutes, the most dangerous man in the city sat in total silence, hunched over a stuffed rabbit. His movements were clumsy, his large fingers struggling with the tiny needle. He poked himself twice, drawing a bead of dark blood, but he didn't flinch. Yuna crawled closer, resting her chin on her knee. You're doing it wrong, she giggled gently. It's supposed to be a crisscross stitch. Seok-Jin paused, the needle mid-air. He looked down at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a decade, the corner of his mouth twitched. Show me, he said. As she placed her small hand over his to guide the needle, the heavy steel doors of the penthouse hoisted open. Do-yoon rushed in, his face pale. Boss, we have a problem. The Choi syndicate didn't just take the mother. They put a bounty on the girl. 5 billion won. Every street rat in the city is looking for a yellow raincoat. Seok-Jin didn't pull his hand away from Yuna's. He finished the stitch, tied a knot with his teeth, and handed the rabbit back to her. Let them look, Seok-Jin said, his voice dropping into a deadly, flat tone. Tell the men to double the perimeter. If a single soul breathes in this hallway without my permission, they don't leave it. Yuna hugged the rabbit, her ear now standing crookedly upright. Thank you, coffee man. Seok-Jin stood up, his warmth vanishing as he turned toward the window. The reflection in the glass wasn't a savior, it was a predator. Do-yoon, Seok-Jin said, his eyes darkening. Get the car ready. If they want to play for the girl, we're going to burn their playground down. The basement of the Blue Crane Social Club smelled of stale tobacco and ozone. It was Seok-Jin's private sanctuary, a place where the city's digital secrets were bought and sold. While Yuna slept under the watchful eye of a bewildered but terrified Do-yoon upstairs, Seok-Jin sat before a wall of monitors. Pull the file on Minho. Everything. From the day he joined the syndicate to the day he disappeared, Seok-Jin commanded. The technician, a nervous young man with bleached hair, tapped rapidly. Boss, that's deep storage stuff. Internal Affairs usually wipes those after 5 years. Then unwipe it. Images began to flicker across the screen. A younger, smiling Minho holding a tray of espresso. A grainy CCTV shot of Minho shaking hands with a high-ranking official. And then, the final police report, accidental death. Hit and run. Seok-Jin's jaw tightened. He had been told back then that Minho had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had sent his friend to deliver a gift to a politician, and the car had never come home. For 5 years, Seok-Jin had carried the guilt of a tragic accident. Wait. Zoom in on the delivery manifest from that night, Seok-Jin said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The screen magnified has scanned documents. The gift wasn't jewelry or cash. It was an encrypted drive, the gold ledger. It contained every scrap, every dirty secret, and every offshore account owned by the Council of Five. Minho didn't die in an accident, Seok-Jin realized, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He was purged. He knew what was on that drive. Sir, the technician stammered, pointing at a second window. Look at the facial recognition. Scan from the alleyway today. The men who took Yuna's mother, they aren't Choi Syndicate. They're wearing council insignias. They're ours. Seok-Jin stood up so abruptly his chair crashed against the floor. The betrayal tasted like copper. In his mouth. His own bosses had killed his best friend and were now hunting an 8-year-old girl to ensure the ledger's location died with her. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had just sewn a rabbit's ear. He had spent his life serving the men who destroyed the only family he ever had. His phone vibrated. It was a restricted number. Seok-Jin, a gravelly voice spoke. He was Chairman Park, the head of the council. We heard. You found a stray kitten in the rain. Bring her to the docks. We'll take the burden off your hands. And your promotion will be finalized by morning. Seok-Jin looked at the monitor, at a photo of Minho holding a newborn Yuna. Both were laughing. The girl is under my protection, Chairman, Seok-Jin said, his voice remarkably calm. Protection? From us? You're a soldier, Seok-Jin. Don't forget who owns the ground you stand on. I haven't forgotten, Seok-Jin replied, his eyes turning to cold flint as he pulled a heavy 1911 pistol from his desk drawer and checked the chamber. But I've decided to change landlords. If you want the girl, come and take her yourself. He hung up and turned to the technician. Wipe the servers. Tell Do-yoon to get the armored SUV. We're leaving the city tonight. The city of Seoul, which had always felt like Seok-Jin's playground, suddenly felt like a closing trap. By 3 a.m., every digital billboard in the Gangnam district seemed to be watching him. The order had gone out, Han Seok-Jin is a traitor. The armored SUV roared through the rain-slicked streets. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Yuna was curled up in the back seat, clutching her repaired rabbit, her eyes wide as she watched Do-yoon check the action on his submachine gun. Boss, the bridge to Gyeonggi is blocked, Do-yoon said, his voice tight. The council's private. Security has the toll booths. We're being squeezed. Seok-Jin didn't blink. He was looking at his phone. A message had just arrived, a video file. He pressed play. The screen showed a woman, bruised but defiant, tied to a chair in a dimly lit warehouse. It was Yuna's mother. Behind her stood a man in a gray suit, Kong, the council's chief executioner. And Seok-Jin's longest-standing rival. Seok-Jin, Kang's voice cracked through the speakers. The chairman is a patient man, but I am not. You have the girl. We have a mother. It's a simple trade. The docks, Pier 7. 1 hour. If you're late, the girl becomes an orphan for real this time. Yuna leaned forward, catching a glimpse of the screen. Is that mommy? Seok-Jin quickly locked the phone, his jaw muscles rippling. He looked at the reflection of the little girl in the rearview mirror, the daughter of the man he'd failed. If he went to the docks, it was an ambush. If he didn't, the only person Yuna had left would die. Do-yoon, take the service tunnel under the river, Seok-Jin commanded. The tunnel? That's a dead end if they catch us there. It's not a dead end if you're the one holding the door, Seok-Jin said. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a heavy encrypted tablet. I'm not trading the girl. I'm trading the one thing the chairman fears more than death. He began typing rapidly. He wasn't just a soldier, he was the man who had built the council's security. He knew the back doors to their bank accounts, their offshore servers, and their private communications. Yuna, Seok-Jin said, turning his head slightly. I need you to be very brave. We're going to find your mother. Are you a superhero, coffee man? She asked, her voice small and hopeful. Seok-Jin looked at his scarred knuckles, then at the pistol resting on his lap. He thought of the blood he had spilled to reach the top of the food chain. No, Yuna, he said, his voice like grinding stones. I'm the monster who works for the good guys tonight. Do-yoon, floor it. We're going to Pier 7, but we aren't going there to talk. The service tunnel was a ribcage of dripping concrete and flickering amber lights. Outside, the world was hunting them, but inside the hum of the SUV, a strange, fragile peace had settled. Seok-Jin knew the docks would be a slaughterhouse. He needed a distraction, and he needed Yuna to understand the one thing he had spent his life perfecting, survival. Listen to me, Yuna, Seok-Jin said, turning his seat to face her. The harsh interior light carved deep shadows into his face, making him look like an ancient statue. In a few minutes, things are going to get very loud. There will be bright lights and men shouting. Do you remember what I told you about the bunny? Yuna nodded, clutching the gray rabbit so hard her knuckles were white. You said if he stays quiet in the tall grass, the fox can't find him. Exactly, Seok-Jin said. He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a small, silver whistle. On a cord. He looped it around his neck. If you get separated from Do-yoon, you find a dark corner. You stay in the grass. Only blow this if you see me, or if you are completely alone. Can you do that? Yuna looked at the whistle, then up at him. Are you going to stay in the grass too? Seok-Jin felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years, fear. Not for himself, but for the light in his eyes. No, Yuna. I'm the one who has to distract the fox. He turned back to Do-yoon, who was white-knuckling the steering wheel. The moment we hit the pier, you take the girl to the sub-level utility room. Don't wait for me. If the flare goes up, you put her on the boat and you don't stop until you hit international waters. Boss, are you going alone? Do-yoon's voice wavered. Against Kong? He's got 30 men and the mother as a shield. Seok-Jin checked the magazine of his pistol, the metallic click-clack echoing in the cramped car. Kong thinks I'm coming to negotiate. He thinks I still want to be chairman. He doesn't realize I've already deleted the council's offshore accounts. By the time I walk onto that pier, the chairman will be bankrupt. Kong won't be fighting for a boss, he'll be fighting for a ghost. He looked at his watch. 3:45 a.m. One more thing, Yuna, Seok-Jin whispered, reaching out to tuck a damp strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was uncharacteristically gentle. When you see your mom, tell her Minho's friend finally finished his last job. The SUV surged out of the tunnel and into the salt-sprayed darkness of the shipping yard. Huge cranes loomed like skeletal giants against the rain. Do-yoon, Seok-Jin commanded, his voice turning to ice. Kill the lights. We're going into darkness. The SUV skidded to a halt behind a wall of rusted shipping containers. The air at Pier 7 tasted of salt, diesel, and impending violence. Above them, the giant cranes groaned in the wind, sounding like mourning ghosts. Go. Now, Seok-Jin ordered. Do-yoon grabbed Yuna's hand. For a split second, the girl hesitated. She looked at Seok-Jin, her small yellow raincoat shivering in the wind. She didn't say goodbye, she just squeezed the stuffed rabbit's repaired ear and vanished into the shadows with Do-yoon. Seok-Jin watched them disappear before stepping into the open. He didn't run. He walked with the measured, terrifying calm of a man who had already accepted his end. In the center of the pier, illuminated by the harsh glare of industrial floodlights, stood Kong. He was surrounded by a dozen men armed with submachine guns. In front of them, tied to a heavy wooden chair, was Yuna's mother, her head bowed. You're late, Seok-Jin, Kong called out, his voice amplified by the open space. And you're empty-handed. Where is the girl? Seok-Jin stopped 20 paces away. He kept his hands visible, away from his sides. The girl is somewhere you'll never find her, Kong. But I didn't come empty-handed. He held up a small, black remote detonator. Kong laughed, a dry, rasping sound. C4? You think a few explosions scare the chairman? Not explosive, Seok-Jin said, his voice cutting through the wind. This is a kill switch for the council's main server in Singapore. In 60 seconds, every euro, and every dollar the chairman owns will be encrypted with a key only I have. Within 2 hours, the international authorities will receive the decrypted logs of every politician he's ever bought. The laughter on the pier died instantly. Kang's face went pale. You're bluffing. You'd be destroying your own life, too. I destroyed my life 5 years ago when I let Minho walk into your trap, Seok-Jin replied. He looked at the timer on his watch. 45 seconds. Untie the woman. Let her walk to the utility entrance. If she makes it, I'll hand over the drive. Kong looked at his men, then at the tablet one of them was holding, which was already flashing red alerts from the chairman. Untie her, Kong hoisted. The woman was pushed forward. She stumbled, her eyes searching the darkness for her daughter. As she passed Seok-Jin, he didn't look at her. He kept his eyes locked on Kong. Run, Seok-Jin whispered as she passed. The moment she reached the shadow of the utility building, the floodlights suddenly died. Seok-Jin didn't wait for the screams. He dropped to one knee, pulling his pistol in one fluid motion. The breach had begun. The pier erupted into a chaos of muzzle flashes and shattering glass. Seok-Jin wasn't fighting like a soldier anymore, he was fighting like a man trying to burn his way out of hell. The pier was a symphony of violence. The darkness was punctuated by the rhythmic orange flare of gunfire. Seok-Jin moved through the shipping containers like a phantom, his breathing shallow and controlled. He wasn't trying to kill everyone, he was trying to be the only thing they looked at. A bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through the expensive wool of his overcoat. He didn't flinch. He spun around a steel corner and fired 2 rounds, dropping a guard who had been closing in on the utility entrance. Seok-Jin. Kang's voice screamed over the din. You think you're a hero? You're a murderer. You're one of us. Seok-Jin ducked behind a crate of heavy machinery. He pulled his last magazine from his belt. He had 4 rounds left. He looked toward the utility building and saw a silhouette, Do-yoon, waving a signal light. The mother and daughter were together. They were near the escape boat. But there was a problem. A group of Kang's elite hitters had bypassed Seok-Jin and were flanking the utility docks. If they reached the water first, Yuna and her mother would be trapped in the crossfire. Seok-Jin looked at the black remote in his hand. He had a choice. He could use the encrypted data as his own shield, to bargain for his own life and disappear into the night with his wealth intact. Or, he could use the data to trigger a deadman switch that would flood the syndicate's internal comms with enough noise to mask the escape, but it would pinpoint his exact GPS location to every hunter on the pier. He looked at the small, crookedly sewn ear of the rabbit he'd fixed earlier. He remembered the smell of coffee. "I was never one of you," Seok-Jin whispered. He smashed the remote against the concrete, activating the signal. Instantly, the tablets and headsets of every Mafia soldier on the pier erupted in a high-pitched, screeching digital feedback. The floodlights flickered back on, but they were strobing wildly, blinding the gunmen. In that moment of total confusion, Seok-Jin stood up. He didn't hide. He stepped into the center of the pier, drawing every eye and every barrel toward him. "Over here," he roared, firing his rounds remaining into the air. The distraction worked. From the corner of his eye, he saw the small motorboat pull away from the dock. In the moonlight, he saw a flash of bright yellow. Yuna was safe. Then, the first bullet hit him in the chest. Then the second. Seok-Jin fell to one knee, the same way he had knelt in the rain. He watched the boat disappear into the black expanse of the sea. For the first time in his life, the cold didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a release. The pier grew hauntingly quiet, the only sounds being the lapping of the tide against the rusted pillars and the distant, fading hum of the motorboat's engine. Seok-Jin lay on the cold concrete, the rain washing the salt and blood from his face. His vision was blurring, the strobing floodlights turning into soft, white halos. He heard the heavy, angry footsteps of Kang approaching. The executioner stood over him, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and disbelief. Kang's own shoulder was bleeding, and his pristine suit was ruined. "You threw it all away," Kang hoisted, pointing his weapon at Seok-Jin's head. "The presidency. The money. The power. All for a brat and a dead man's memory." Seok-Jin managed a wet, ragged laugh. A crimson bubble popped on his lips. "You wouldn't understand, Kang. You've never had a favorite coffee." Kang growled, his finger tightening on the trigger, but a sudden roar of sirens cut through the night. Blue and red lights began to dance across the shipping containers. The noise Seok-Jin had triggered hadn't just scrambled the syndicate's comms, it had sent a high-priority distress signal to the national police, along with the GPS coordinates of the council's most wanted killers. "Boss, we have to move," one of Kang's remaining men shouted. "The SWAT teams are 3 minutes out." Kang looked at the dying man on the ground, then at the approaching sirens. With a final curse, he spat on the concrete and turned to run, leaving Seok-Jin alone in the dark. Seok-Jin closed his eyes. He thought of Yuna's laughter and the way she had guided his hand with the needle. He felt the silver whistle he had kept a duplicate of in his pocket. He had lived his life as a predator, a shadow that consumed everything he touched. But in these final moments, he didn't feel like a shadow. He felt like the light that had guided a little girl home. The sound of the rain began to fade, replaced by a strange, peaceful warmth. He wasn't afraid of the end. He was only thinking of a small, gray rabbit with a crookedly sewn ear, safe on a boat, moving toward a horizon where the coffee always smelled like home. 5 years later. A small, bustling cafe on the outskirts of Jeju Island sat overlooking the sea. It was a quiet place, known for its specific, bitter blend of coffee that reminded the premises of the old city shops. A young girl, now nearly 13, sat at a corner table. She was dressed in a neat school uniform, her dark hair tied back. On the table next to her textbook sat a worn, gray stuffed rabbit. Its ear was still crooked, the crisscross stitches held firm by years of care. "Yuna, your mom needs help with the morning deliveries," a voice called from the kitchen. "Coming, Auntie," Yuna replied, tucking a lock of hair behind her ear. As she stood up, she glanced out the window. A man was standing on the boardwalk, his back to the cafe. He wore a simple, dark overcoat, his shoulders broad and steady. He didn't move, just watched the waves for a long time. Yuna froze. Something about the way he stood, the stillness of his posture, felt impossibly familiar. She reached for the silver whistle that hung on a chain around her neck, a habit she'd never outgrown. The man turned slightly, his profile catching the morning sun. A faint, jagged scar traced his jawline, and his hair, once slicked back and jet black, was now shorter and peppered with gray. He didn't approach. He simply inclined his head, a small, respectful nod. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small coin, and placed it on the railing of the boardwalk. Then, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the morning mist. Yuna ran outside, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached the railing and found the coin. It wasn't money. It was a small, brass button, the kind found on the cuff of an expensive, tailored Italian suit. She looked toward the path where he had vanished, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. But she wasn't crying because she was sad. She was smiling. She leaned over the railing, took a deep breath of the salt air and the rich aroma of roasting beans wafting from the cafe, and whispered to the wind. "The coffee is ready, Seok-Jin Nim." Far down the beach, the man in the dark coat paused for a single second, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in a lifetime, before he continued walking into a world where he was no longer a boss, but a man who had finally found his way home.